Welcome to the Autism Central Podcast, the home of real stories, honest conversations, and shared wisdom from England's National Autism Peer Education Programme. Here, we bring together autistic people and the people who love, support, and care for autistic people of all ages and backgrounds to explore every aspect of life. The National Autism Peer Education Programme is delivered by Anna Freud and commissioned by NHS England. Through education, coaching, and connection, we offer resources, group webinars, one-to-one peer support, and community events that centre lived experience and build real understanding. Our vision is a society where autistic people, their families, and those who support them are empowered, connected, and thriving. This is your space, your community, your podcast. Welcome to Autism Central. Joining me today on the podcast is Hannah Saxe, a family law solicitor from Bradners who helps her clients navigate relationship breakdown and the issues arising from it, which can include divorce, financial issues, cohabitants' rights, and the arrangements for children. She is a late diagnosed AuDHD and the mum of two neurodivergent boys, so she brings both lived and professional experience to our conversation today. She's also an award-winning advocate for neuroinclusion in the family justice system and the legal profession, and she has led many in-conversation events at the Late Discovered Club on this very theme, supporting women who need neuro-affirming guidance. So welcome, Hannah. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you for being here today. You're here today, aren't you, to talk about autism, neurodivergence and relationship breakdown and the legal basics and what neuroaffirming support can look like. And this was one of the themes when we wrote out to our families and our listeners and autistic people about what they wanted to see in season 5. This was one of the themes that came up a lot from people. So thank you for being here.
And thank you for inviting me, Catherine. I'm really pleased to be here. Yes, I have seen in my practice as a family lawyer, I've been doing this for 20 years now, an increase with the increase in awareness around neurodiversity of neurodivergent clients or clients of mine who have neurodivergent children, and the specific issues and added challenges that can bring when relationships end or when you're attempting to sort out the arrangements for your children after a sort of historical separation. And there is neuro-affirming care out there. So what I hope to be able to do today is do some signposting about that, and also some signposting about the ways in which you can resolve family law issues to hopefully demystify the process a bit and make it seem less daunting. Because I know from having spoken to my clients that it can feel additionally daunting when you've got a neurodivergent brain or you have got children who are neurodivergent in circumstances where you may already be struggling with things like school and advocacy around that. You may find yourself in a situation where your relationship has broken down because of factors relating to neurodivergence. I think we've spoken before about the fact that it's more likely for neurodivergent folks to unfortunately be in abusive relationships, and that's a common theme that I see. The other theme that I have seen in my practice in recent years is an increase in late diagnosed people who, once they have had their diagnosis or once they have identified as neurodivergent, they have gone through that sort of grief process and that reflective process. And part of that can be reviewing where you're at in terms of your relationships and whether that's what you want moving forward. And that's an area that really interests me as a late diagnosed woman, because I've been through that process with myself as well. And where you sort of look back and you think, well, what is masking, and what was I masking, and what is really me, and what do I actually want, and sort of restructuring your life and how you do things to work with your brain rather than against it.
Yeah, they're really, really valid points, Hannah. And yeah, absolutely. There will be people listening who are perhaps in the midst of all of these things. They are struggling with schooling. They're struggling maybe with health struggles, mental health struggles, burnout. Um, they're on a low income because they've had to perhaps give up work to care for a child. So there's so many layers to this, isn't there? So many layers. And yeah, you're absolutely right. At that phase after this late discovery of really looking at your life in a very different way. So for people who are listening today, for autistic people, for parents, carers, who might be facing a separation, or maybe they're thinking that I can't do this anymore. I cannot go forward in this relationship anymore. It's affecting my health, it's affecting my mental health, it's affecting the family's mental health. Maybe they don't know where on earth they will begin or where they're going to seek help. What would you say to them?
I would start off by saying that unfortunately the family justice system isn't in the best of shape at the moment. It's partially because of underfunding and things being oversubscribed, but also the pandemic. So things like the family court, for example, are very oversubscribed. There's long delays. And for those navigating that system, it can feel quite unjust sometimes. And I think that can probably be daunting. I think instructing solicitors like me can seem daunting, and the worries about the cost of that, because it used to be that if your income was below a certain level, you would have access to public funding or legal aid. The rules about that are now much more strict, and you generally are only entitled to legal aid if your income's below a certain level and you're the victim of domestic abuse. Um, so that's something that's been taken away from a lot of people. There are more people navigating the system themselves as litigants in person, is what we call them, self representing people, which can slow processes down. Um, and can just be tricky for them because they don't do this every day like we lawyers do. So what I would say first of all is, um, it's really important to do your own research, almost like your own due diligence about the process, because with relationship breakdown and divorce, you've always know somebody who's been through it, and their experience might be completely different to yours. So it's important to get that help and advice yourself, rather than necessarily sort of um, relying on friends and family. It's great to have friends and family there, as a support network, but it's really important to get um, proper advice and support. And by that, I mean, um, yes, take advice from a solicitor about what the road ahead is likely to look like based on your circumstances, because very often it may not be what you expect. So, a really obvious example of that is, um, you have a married couple where the rules are very clear and there's a piece of law about how it works in terms of dissolving the marriage and getting a divorce and sorting out the money. The Matrimonial Causes Act, it's called. But if you are an unmarried couple and you split up, then the rules are completely different. The law is completely different. And actually, the remedies available to you in relation to the finances are really limited. So it's really important, even if it's just for an initial bit of advice before you go off and try and do some stuff yourself, for example, to save money. It's really important that you get that initial advice, because what you believe is the potential outcome, or what you should be aiming for, could be completely different to what um, the law says. So using the married, unmarried example again, um, a lot of unmarried couples believe that you can be what's called a common law spouse or a common law husband or wife, when actually there is no such thing in England and Wales. So it doesn't matter how long you've been not married, how long you've been in a relationship with somebody, or if you've got kids with them. There's no concept of common law spouse, and actually the rules about the finances on relationship breakdown, if you're not married, are completely different to getting a divorce. So it's really important that you get that advice. And it's not just about the legal position, but also about your options for sorting it all out. Because at the end of the day, that's what we want. We want to get to a point where you've separated your finances, or you've got a structure for spending time with your children. And in this current day and age, with the cost of living crisis, more and more people are needing to do a lot of that legwork themselves. But it's really important to have that initial advice sort of in your back pocket, so that you know what you should be aiming for, so that you are better informed about the choices that you make going through that process. And because of the poor state of the family justice system at the moment, um, a lot of the processes are geared more towards people doing it themselves. So, getting a divorce now, you can do sort of online. You don't The actual dissolution of the marriage part is all online and is very much geared towards people doing it themselves. So it's easy to understand and to fill in online. Um, so a lot more of my clients, I think now, compared to 5, 10 years ago, they do the divorce bit themselves. And what they come to lawyers for is to sort out the finances or the arrangements for the children. We also have um, a real increase, and this is a great thing, in your options for like out of court dispute resolution, so non court options. And they are basically things like mediation, and arbitration. Mediation is where you go and have meetings with a mediator. You have one mediator, and they work with the couple to come up with a solution, either about the finances or the children. And arbitration is a bit like court, but a private process. So you don't get involved in the family justice system. It's a private process where you have an arbitrator who makes a decision about certain family law issues. But through that process, you might still have a solicitor who advises you. So it's like an added layer of support if it's a more complicated issue. Very many clients will go through mediation, and what they will do is they will have a solicitor through that process as well. But the actual meetings usually just take place with the parties. But it's constantly evolving, and we now have solicitor inclusive mediation, where you can have a mediation session with a mediator, but have your solicitors there. So it's there are options other than going to court, and if I think court should be seen as a last resort, rather than, well, we've had a dispute about the arrangements for other children, we will immediately go to court and get a judge to make a decision. There are other options out there which are often cheaper, more amicable, and therefore everybody's going to be a lot happier to go along with whatever outcome you get. And often faster than going to court, because of the delays that we're experiencing at the moment.
And what you're describing there, Hannah, about just telling us basically what the options are and how you navigate this system, that's sometimes one of the biggest barriers, isn't it? Because if you are autistic yourself, if you are neurodivergent, you might need to know, to be able to see, to somebody to be able to explain to you exactly what's going to happen and what kind of path you're going to be walking. And if you don't know even where to begin or where to seek help, and especially if you don't know of any family lawyers, family solicitors who are neurodivergent themselves or are working through, that neuroaffirming lens, that can be a barrier too, can't it? Of thinking, well, actually, I'm not going to be understood, or the process is going to be too much. So that's really my next question for you, is about, talking us through some of the legal basics and what neuroaffirming support actually looks like.
Sure. So dealing with the sort of legal basics, there are sort of two key areas where family lawyers are consulted usually. And the first one is in relation to sorting out the money, and the second one is in relation to sorting out the arrangements for children. Um, as I touched on before, the situation in terms of the money is different if you're married or not married. If you are married, there is a divorce, usually, and then a financial settlement that flows from that. It's almost as if the divorce is the vehicle through which you get your binding financial settlement in relation to a divorce. And you have an exchange of financial information so that everybody knows what everybody else has got in terms of assets and resources. And if you have a solicitor acting for you, they will give you advice based on the information about what you should be aiming for in terms of a settlement. And either you can agree something with your ex with the help of their solicitor or them directly. And if you can, which most people can in most cases to give reassurance, um, it's drawn up into something called a consent order, which is basically a document that says who's having what in terms of the assets. So if you've got a house, it might say, well, the house is going to be sold and this is how we're going to divide the proceeds. If you've got pensions, it might say, well, there's going to be a pension sharing order. So, the spouse who's got a pension has to give a bit of their pension to the other spouse. It might have a maintenance in there, so a payment each month until financial independence is established. Those are some of the orders that can be made on divorce. And as I say, the vast majority of people are able to reach an agreement about what that arrangement will look like through solicitors. Another option is mediation, where you go and have a series of meetings with a mediator. They are usually solicitors as well, but their role is to help the parties, the couple, come up with their own solution. So what they usually do is they'll sort of help you work out what you've got, draw up a sort of schedule of your assets, and they know how the law works in terms of how assets should be divided. So they know that you can have a pension sharing order, for example. But what they won't do is give specific, like one-sided legal advice. They are there to sort of help the couple come up with an agreement. And at that point, once an agreement's been reached, the couple can then go to solicitors and have it drawn up into a consent order, like I said earlier. And what a lot of people do is they will have advice from a solicitor in the background as they're going through that mediation process, so that they know what to aim for when negotiating. That's a really important point. And as I said earlier, we've got some hybrid versions of that now where if you need to, you can have your solicitor there with you in the mediation process if you need that extra level of support. The other options are, if you really can't get an agreement or there's a stumbling block somewhere. So common themes are you might be worried that your spouse is not disclosing the full extent of their assets, or they might be trying to dispose of assets. In those cases, or in cases where you just really can't get an agreement and you've tried everything, you can go to court. You can make an application for what's called financial relief, where the process is managed by the court and there are court orders and deadlines that the other person has to comply with. So you essentially compelling them to do it. So very often I find autistic clients or neurodivergent clients will be thinking, well, there's no way my spouse is going to cooperate. They're so difficult. They're so sort of entrenched in their views. They're not going to tell me what assets they've got. They're not going to cooperate or go to mediation with me. So I would always say there is a way to do it, even with the most difficult opponent. And very often, a massive part of my job is trying to have my clients or understand that they're going to have to do it. I know you don't want to give 12 months bank statements to your spouse because they'll see what you've been spending your money on. But the alternative is that they are suspicious that you're hiding something and then we don't settle the finances. So it's those discussions and And generally, even in very acrimonious cases, or cases with really tricky issues like non-disclosure, it's still possible to agree something once you get everybody on the same page and they realize that actually going to court is not great because it's going to take a long time, it's going to be expensive, and it really should be viewed as a last resort.
And I suppose that touches, doesn't it, on the higher prevalence of abuse. What you referred to in the introduction, that the higher prevalence of abuse and abuse in relationships, and there might be people listening who might not even recognize that they wouldn't even term that they are in an abusive relationship, but when it comes to starting to have conversations about wanting to end a relationship or leave a marriage or separate, those conversations around money can become a way of control, can't they? Of saying, they might hear from their partner that they're not going to get anything, they're not going to be able to afford to live, they're going to be homeless, all of these things that might make them have to stay in a relationship that they don't want to be in. And I think it's really important, Hannah, that people who are listening, who might be in that situation now listening, know that for even the most difficult of people, there is a resolution.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it is so common. It's so common where you have ex-partners saying things like that, or you're not going to be able to be financially independent from me, or you have it with children where you might have um, someone say, "Well, if you leave me, I'm going to tell everybody that you're crazy, and and the kids will be taken off you because they'll see how crazy you are." And that's so common as well. This idea that I'm going to do something, and you won't be able to see your children if you leave me. Um, what I would say to anybody experiencing those issues is that family law professionals are aware of that, and there's much better awareness around domestic abuse and the different types of domestic abuse that exist now than when I started out. So financial abuse is recognised, and there's some people doing brilliant work around that, in the awareness work around that in the family justice system at the moment. Um, and there is a growing awareness about the more indirect types of abuse that exist, so coercive and controlling behaviour. And again, there's more awareness with the police about that, I recognise now, than when I first started out. I think if a few years ago, if you'd have said, I want to go and speak to the police about my abusive partner, but you hadn't been pushed down the stairs or punched or something, they would be less willing to engage because they'd say, oh no, it's more of a civil matter. But actually, they do recognise now that yes, that's a terrible part of domestic abuse, but there are much more subtle, like insidious ways that people can be subjected to abuse, and it often is financial. It is more subtle things. It is emotional and psychological abuse, not just physical abuse. So there's definitely more awareness around it. There are orders out there that you can get to protect yourself from abuse. Um, and that's it's called a non-molestation order, like a personal protection injunction. There's a type of order that you can get if you live together, where you can oust the other person if it's really bad, um, or regulate occupation so you don't have to come into contact with one another. There are options there, but it is, you do have to have, I don't downplay at all the fact that you've got to have some serious fortitude about you to escape those types of discussions, because it's terrifying stuff. And I suppose the best I can say to that is, get yourself some advice from somebody that knows what they're talking about. Doesn't have to be from a solicitor, particularly if it's an abusive situation. There are brilliant agencies like Women's Aid out there, um, the National Centre for Domestic Violence, uh, sort of bridges a good gap in terms of, as I said earlier, legal aid is not always available if you have a high income. in domestic abuse situations. And what the National Centre for Domestic Violence does, because it's a charity, is those people that aren't eligible for public funding but might not have the resources to spend money on lawyers to go and get these protective orders, they will do a big chunk of that work for you, to get you the initial orders. And you might need to go to a solicitor later, but they do a big chunk of the work for you for free without charge. So there's some really great services out there, um, and it's one of the things that I will touch on later is about having a support network in place. And so it's really important to work on that as well. So you've got your sort of exit plan and the support that you need.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that actually about, some of the practical things that people can do to really look after themselves, because you've talked about you've referenced that word fortitude. The word itself, fortitude, it's like, you've got to surround yourself, haven't you? And this is more than resilience. This is fortitude of what you're going to go into. And I know for many people who start this process or even start to verbalize out loud that they want to leave their marriage, that's often the point when abuse steps up, when coercion steps up, when you might be met with silent treatment, when you might be met with a whole host of additional things that, when you're already burnt out, when you're already navigating and supporting your children, even the idea of that ramping up and amplifying and having to find this sense of fortitude. What are the things that you can recommend, Hannah, from the work that you've done and the people that you've worked with? How do you look after yourself through this process?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely echo what you say. So many clients, they come to me at this sort of crisis point in the breakdown of their relationship or their relationship with their co-parent, and they are deep in burnout. I'm not a therapeutic professional, but I can see it because of the work that I do, that they are burnt out and they are exhausted. And then on top of that, they might have to be dealing with ramped up abusive behaviors or alienating behaviors. And they're then potentially going to have to instruct a solicitor and go through a legal process. I mean, it's sort of objectively, it's so difficult. And so the best advice I can give is get yourself a support network, a team in place. So it could be, first of all, like a family member or friend, who you can talk to, who is there to be a sounding board. They can do things like attend meetings with professionals with you, so that, and I know I would be exactly the same, in that I would go and have a meeting with somebody like me, and I would not take half of it in because I would be in my own head or distracted. And so if you've got another person there with you, they are also listening to the advice, and then you can go away and talk about it in your own time. Obviously, solicitors can also summarise things in writing as well, so you can go away and think about it in your own time. There will always be times where, even though you can indicate a preference that, I prefer written communication, there will always be times where we have to take instructions verbally. Um, and that can be a struggle for some neurodivergent clients. I recognise that. Um, just because of we've got to take instructions quickly. So having someone else there, your sounding board with you, if it's your sister or your mum or your dad or your friend, that's really important. Um, if you don't have that in your life, which some people don't, you can use a coach, like a divorce coach, who again is there to not really there to sort of help with the legal side of things, but is there to sort of help you feel more confident in your decision making, because there's a lot of big decisions that have to be made when instructing a solicitor about relationship breakdown. You've got to give them instructions. We can recommend to you what we think you should do, but it's your life and we can only act on the basis of our client's instructions. So there's big decisions that have to be made, and I understand about decision paralysis. Oh, yes, I do, because I'm a neurodivergent person myself. Um, so I can't imagine the level of task paralysis or decision fatigue that you must get when navigating relationship breakdown, because there's a lot of big admin jobs that you need to do, and there's a lot of big decisions that need to be made. What a coach can do is they can help you with some of the admin jobs because they usually understand the processes, or sort of help you a bit like a neurodiversity coach, if anybody's ever had one of those, where they'll sort of help you come up with some systems and help you get over that, you know, uh, task avoidance, task paralysis about big jobs to do with the relationship breakdown. But they'll also sort of help build up your confidence and your fortitude so that you can make those decisions. If you don't have family or friends support around you, or you don't feel like you've got the level of support where you would want them sort of involved quite deeply in the process, there are professionals out there who'll do it for you and support you in that way. Some other basics, again, about having all your raw materials and doing your due diligence. You've got your lawyer, your solicitor, and also think about if you've got more complicated assets, a financial advisor or a wealth manager who will be able to give you the figures that you need, and again offer support in that respect. So you might have your lawyer saying, "Well, can you tell me, how much money, how much income do you get from your business?" And you might think, "Well, I've got no idea." So you want to have somebody that is has that level of skill on your team as well if you need it. And there are cases where you don't need that level of support because the assets don't call for it. But a really daunting thing sometimes can be, well, actually, I've got my own business, or we've got this investment portfolio, and I've got no idea about it. So having somebody in your gang on your team who really knows their stuff about that and about tax implications and things like that is really important. Um, yeah, so having a sort of dream team around you.
I'm also thinking here about those parents and carers or autistic people listening who don't have all of those things that you talk about, and actually they need things like benefits advice. They need to know what they're entitled to. Where would people go for that? So if you're talking about putting people, creating this circle of support, where might people go to get that benefits advice?
There's a lot of help online. You can, of course, go to Citizens Advice Bureau, who will help with a sort of overview of that sort of thing, and signpost to the various agencies. There are helpful online calculators, both for benefits entitlement and also for things like child maintenance. So what people don't realise is that child maintenance is dealt with by a completely separate organisation called the Child Maintenance Service. And actually, they have got a really helpful calculator on their website, um, where you can put in details of your co-parents' income and how often they see the children, it's the amount of days per year, and it will give you an indication of what they should be paying in terms of child maintenance. And if they they won't provide that voluntarily, then you can go to the child maintenance service, who will collect maintenance from them directly from their pay packet, usually if they are employed.
So this is one of the things, isn't it? Is if you're in this phase of thinking about leaving, you can go online, you can access these calculators online without having to put lots of personal information in, to get an idea, to get an indication of what you might be entitled to. And you touched on the child support. I wanted to call it the CSA, the Child Support Agency, but it's now a different name, isn't it? Child Maintenance Service, the CMS. And I suppose at the centre and at the heart of all of this, when it comes to relationships, if there are children involved, that's the thing, isn't it? How do we make sure, what are some of the practical things that we can do to support autistic children during the process? And I'm thinking about autistic children who absolutely need to thrive on structure and routine and predictability and familiarity.
It does, and I think this is an area I've got so much experience in, both professionally and personally, as the mum of two neurodivergent boys who require um, or rely on me and my husband for scaffolding to get them out the door in the morning, to make sure they're okay at school, and to sort of debrief after days at school or days out. So um, I get it. And I think a really important point that can be lost in relationship breakdown or in a dispute about the arrangements for children is the need for communication with your co-parent. Even if you don't get on with each other, it's so important, particularly if you've got neurodivergent kids, to do your best to be on the same page in terms of the strategies that you employ at home to make sure everybody is calm and happy. Um, it's going to be stressful for any kids whose parents are going through separation or who are in a dispute about what the arrangements for their care should be. But a real basic requirement for navigating this successfully with neurodivergent kids is having the same approach in your respective homes, or if you're still living together, having the same approach whilst co-parenting, but separately, but under the same roof. So, and it's so difficult because you might think, well, I don't want to have these discussions with them. I don't want to talk to them. But there are ways to get through that. There are brilliant parenting apps that exist now for the purposes of communication between co-parents. And there are a number of them, but some of the main ones are Our Family Wizard. There's another one called App Close, um, and that's an sort of an online app or you have it on your phone, and you might agree with your co-parent that you're going to communicate with them through that about the arrangements for the children. So you can obviously it can be used to work out what the sort of structure of the arrangements is going to look like. So what's the calendar going to look like? And you've got it there on your phone, a reminder. But also it has a messaging feature. They have a messaging feature where some of them will even sort of tone check what you say for you. So it can really help with taking the heat out of disputes in relation to the arrangements for children. Um, and you can do things like put in place boundaries on the app. So you can say, well, look, I'm not going to look at messages after a certain time, or I'm only going to check messages once a day. I'm going to check them because, again, what we were talking about earlier about coercive and controlling stuff, a lot of the time that can be bombarding people with messages, or the tone of messages, even if it's not intended, being taken as being, undermining or aggressive. Even if that's not what was intended, it can be read that way, can't it? So these apps do help with that because it can sort of say, well, are you sure you want to say that? Or it will stop you before you send the message. But also just the general idea that this app exists, um, and that's the mode of communication. And it's something where, all of the messages could be printed out and shown to a judge if you were in proceedings. That generally tends to make co-parents be on their best behaviour when communicating through these apps. And so they're a brilliant tool. And particularly helpful for neurodivergent folks, where because it's all in one place, you can reread what has happened, what you've been talking about, and digest it in your own time. You've not got to think, well, wait, did they call me about that, or did they send me a message on WhatsApp, or did they send me a text message, or is it on an email, or is it on a solicitor's letter? It's all in one place, so it's more streamlined. Um, so that can be a really helpful tool.
I wonder as well, Hannah, about parents who are listening who perhaps for their partner, an extension of coercive control or abuse might be the I'm not going to communicate with you. I'm not going to respond to you. I'm not going to show up when I say I was going to show up. Um, I'm not going to pay the maintenance when I said I was going to pay it. These are all ways, aren't they, of control. And I wonder about those parents who are in that situation post separation or going through a separation. Some of those things you can't control as a parent. You have no control over your ex-partner and how they are behaving and the damage that is inflicting on your children. So, if we think about for those people listening, what are some of the really practical things that you could do in that situation to support your autistic children if uh, if you're doing this predominantly alone in that sense, if you don't have a co-parent who is willing to co-parent?
In a sensible way. Yeah. Yeah. And it's again, unfortunately, it's really common. And I always say to clients that, we can only do so much. We can't change somebody's personality. So if they're going to be difficult, you just have to say to yourself, I've tried to deal with you in a conciliatory way, and it just is what it is, and we've got to deal with them as they are with us. Um, there's there are plenty of things you can do, and what's really important is to sort of have in place what your boundaries are when communicating with somebody like that. So, if you have someone who, where you might put in place, for example, a time for them to see your child and then they don't show up. And that is very unsettling for your child because they were expecting to, for example, go out to the park with their dad and their dad doesn't show up and they're stood there with their coat on and they don't come. And then you're left to deal with the fallout of that, of saying, well, actually, he's not arrived. Um, you have that situation where, yeah, you don't, it's not just the impact on you of the arrangement being unsettled, but also the impact on your child. And I think what you've got to, um, think about is having a structure in place. So you have um, a structure as to what the arrangements are going to look like, and you stick to it. And if that person doesn't stick to it, then they don't get to see the child. And if necessary, if they're then saying, "Oh, well, I want to change it. I want to change it. I want to see them on another time," you can you are well within your rights to say, "No, look, we've agreed on this arrangement, and that's what I'm prepared to facilitate. But I need to know what's going to happen because I need to be able to organise myself. I need to know that you're going to be there, um, so that I can manage." Our child's expectations about the arrangements. Every everybody, not just children, but also parents, thrive when there is a structure in place, and that's why, in cases where you can't agree arrangements for children, you can apply for something called a child arrangements order, and that is essentially a schedule of what the arrangements for the child are going to be. So who they're going to live with, and how often they're going to spend time with the other parent, and for how long. And in the most difficult cases where you have um, a co-parent who just is can't be flexible or won't stick to arrangements, you you need one of those orders. And essentially, what you then do is that those are your boundaries, and you say you can see them in accordance with the order. Other than that, you can't see them. And hopefully, in a few months, in a few years, things will have settled down, and maybe your child's needs will evolve and change, and you may be able to agree additional time or flexibility. But when you're dealing with an abusive co-parent, it's getting a structure in place. However, you do that. Often involving an order and sticking to it, and all essentially just being able to stand behind it and say, this is when you can see them, and I can't deviate from that because I've got to know where I am and our child's got to know where they are, um, on a weekly basis. That's really important. Um, and the other sort of really important thing for neurodivergent parents or parents of neurodivergent kids is just having that line of communication open, even if you are you have to have it in a very controlled way. So you've got to have it on the app. You can say, I'm not communicating with you in any other format other than on the app. So if you send me a text message or you call me or you send me an email, I'm not going to answer unless it's an emergency. So don't. And that's what I'm going to do. And you can do what you want, but that's what I'm going to do. I'm only going to check it at this time, and stick to hold fast to your boundaries. And essentially, you can be the one doing all of the sensible things. You can sort of say, well, look, they had a temperature yesterday. I've given them some Calpol. I this is what I have done to manage the fact that they're upset about letting goals in football yesterday. So this is how I'm approaching that. I think you should do the same. Um, and sort of model the behavior that your child needs to feel settled. Um, but ultimately, the arrangements for children and the way that the court approaches it is it's all about what's in your child's best interests. And as long as you're being child focused at all times, then you can't go wrong. And you are well within your rights as someone with parental responsibility for your child to assert that parental responsibility to keep your child safe and well, including emotional stability. So, in the most serious of cases, if you even if you have an order in place and something is going awry, um, you can exercise your parental responsibility and say, "Look, there's something going on with you today, and I'm not going to facilitate that contact." If there is no order of the court in place, then you can do that. You might have a structure, but you might say, "No, look, I'm going to have to assert my parental responsibility here, and to keep my child sort of safe and happy." If there's an order in place and you've almost got to go against that order, um, technically, what you should do is make an application back to court to vary the arrangements, or you can still say, "Look, I accept there's an order in place, but situations have changed since we entered into that order." And if the other parent then says, "Well, right, I'm going to enforce that order. I'm gonna take you back to court to try and get you to facilitate that order," you've then got an excuse, or you should have an excuse to say, "Look, it's completely reasonable how I've behaved. Here's all of my interactions on the app. This is the approach I've adopted, um, and I've sort of had no choice other than to suspend the arrangements temporarily or offer slightly different arrangements to keep the child safe and well."
So boundaries, structure, so important, aren't
Yes.
they, to support autistic children, support any children, but especially autistic children during that process. For any parent or carer or autistic person who is listening today, who might be feeling really overwhelmed or, so scared about their relationship or their marriage ending, what would you want them to hear from you right now?
A thing that has happened in recent time, which has given me a lot of hope as an autistic person and as a family lawyer, is that with the greater awareness around neurodiversity, there are some great initiatives within the family justice system about neuroaffirming support. And one of them is the Family Justice Council guidelines about neurodiversity. And these came about because it was actually found through research that there's an overrepresentation of neurodivergent folks in the family justice system, so in the court process, in much the same way as there's an overrepresentation of neurodivergent folks in the criminal justice system. And this was recognised, and there are now guidelines to help professionals involved in the family justice system support neurodivergent people. And that doesn't just apply to going to court, although that's predominantly what it's about. It also applies to interactions with professionals in the family justice system. So, for example, interactions with a solicitor or a social worker or a mediator. And so these guidelines exist, and as neurodivergent people, we should know about them, because what it does is, if you find yourself involved in the family justice system, you can direct your professionals. They should already know about them, but you should direct your professionals to those guidelines. And it removes some of the need for advocacy, self advocacy, because what it essentially is it's a summary of what neurodiversity is, and the key different types of neurodiversity, like autism and ADHD. And it sets out the sort of strengths and challenges that we as neurodivergent people face, um, and some of the ways in which those needs and challenges can be accommodated when navigating the family justice system. So, for example, it says things like, um, if you're in a court hearing, you might need a break. You might need to have a fidget toy. You might need to um, have more time to process information. You might have sensory needs. So you might need noise cancelling headphones or loops in your ears to be able to focus. Because even as a neurotypical person, it must be incredibly difficult. And we as lawyers, I think, forget this sometimes because we do it all the time. But it must be incredibly difficult to go through the process of being in a court hearing, because you don't have any control over when it starts or when it finishes. People are talking about complicated issues to do with the law. You might have to give evidence, and what giving evidence involves is sort of being asked questions about your case or what you've said about this situation, whilst also having to look at a written bundle of documents about the case. So you're sort of having to look at the bundle, then answer questions, then listen to the question, give your answer, um, which is overwhelming if you're neurotypical, I'm sure. But add to that the fact that you could be dyslexic, or an ADHDer, and find the having to sit down and focus on something for hours incredibly uncomfortable. Um, so it's shining a light on those challenges that specifically neurodivergent folks face when in those situations, and suggesting what are essentially reasonable adjustments that can be put in place. It's even possible to have an intermediary, so another person there with you in the court hearing who will help you give your answers and help you process all of that information. So it's a brilliant document. Um, and there is talk of a specific judicial guidance coming out. I think it's at some point this year. So specific guidance for judges about neurodiversity, not just for the sort of client facing professionals. Um, and as a result of that, or sort of starting off with that, there is now a toolkit for mediators as well. So if you go to mediation, there's a toolkit that you can again signpost them to, or they should know about how to help neurodivergent folks navigate the mediation process. Um, and something that I know my kids have at school, that has come into the legal profession as well, is like an all about me document. So my little boy at school, he has his passport for when he changes class each year, that talks about some of the stuff he struggles with in class and some of the strategies that they've put in place to help manage that. So it might say for him, shouts out in class a lot, sit next to sensible girl. Yes. But so the equivalent of that might be an all about me document where you can say, I'd rather solicitor, I'd rather have written communication as my preference. I appreciate there's times when we're going to have to talk on the phone, but I'd rather have written communication. I'd rather you just sent me one email a day unless it's an emergency. Um, I'd like to have this person come into meetings with me. I need to have low lighting because artificial lighting is like kryptonite to me. All your specific sensory profile, the ways that work with your brain, in terms of giving instructions and receiving advice. You can put all of that in an all about me document and take that into mediation. But also you can just have it in place with your solicitor or when you're having a meeting with a social worker or somebody from CAFCAS, which is the organisation that deals with reports to do with the arrangements for children in court proceedings. So there are, I think there is a growing recognition of neurodiversity within the family justice system. And that's a really key document that you can read, that you can direct your professionals to without having to feel like, oh, it's another person that I'm meeting where I'm going to have to explain that I'm an AuDHDer and I can't do fluorescent lighting, or if, more than one person's talking to me at the same time, there's no chance I'm going to be listening to them. Um, I feel like there has been a move away from um, feeling as self-conscious about being out as neurodivergent in the family justice system. So, I remember not so long ago, um, another another firm that I worked at, a solicitor saying, "Oh, I can't believe the client wanted to wear noise cancelling headphones in the hearing. What's the judge going to think? They're going to think they're trying to get garner sympathy or get some kind of advantage." Um, and was just a sort of total misunderstanding about neurodiversity and sort of how it shows up, and why shouldn't somebody be able to wear noise cancelling headphones to be able to give their best evidence at court, and those sorts of viewpoints, old-fashioned viewpoints. I think we are moving away from that, and I think judges are not now going to think, "Oh, well, what are they doing? With their headphones on, they're trying to get sympathy, or they're trying to sort of make it all about them." Or that's we're moving away from that, and the good thing for neurodivergent folks is they can say, "Well, look, I want to follow these guidelines. I need these adjustments in place." And that's just one of them. That's just part of something I need to do to manage my sensory sensitivities.
That's really reassuring to hear. And I think that's what people need to hear, that there are guidelines in place and that there's a growing movement clearly in the family justice system for more neuroaffirming support, and that's needed, isn't it? And I suppose that brings me back to, for those parents, as we were talking about at the very beginning of our conversation today, those parents who are just discovering themselves that they might be autistic or neurodivergent, who might be also on this journey of rediscovering themselves at the same time that they are separating or getting divorced, their relationships ending. And there's so much of your own work, isn't there, in all of this, is about understanding yourself. And even in a couple, you might have a couple who are both neurodivergent. Maybe one recognizes that they are and has come to that conclusion, and the other one really hasn't. One person shuts down and the other one goes into fight mode. And some of that is about understanding, isn't it? Each other's sense of self. And like you say, the passport and the about me, we need this as adults going through that process. You need that to be able to advocate for yourself and to make sure that the process that you're going through doesn't add to what you're already going through. So thank you so much.
And that it's fair, because it's all about being able to give your best evidence and um, being able to put your case forward. And if you have these additional challenges, going back to the idea of a dyslexic person trying to navigate giving evidence in court, it wouldn't be a fair trial. So it's really important. I mean, I see that a lot. It's really interesting what you say about neurodivergent partners being at different stages in terms of their awareness about neurodivergence. I think that's so true. And in my line of work, I often see um, someone who is neurodivergent, either diagnosed or sort of self-identified, and they're saying to me, "Oh, I'm sure my partner is as well, but it's a sort of different flavour, and we sort of clash as a result." So that's really common. I mean, I say it anecdotally, but it is so true that neurodivergent folks, we do flock together. I know that after I got my diagnosis, I had friends and family members who have subsequently gone on to get a diagnosis. And my friends, a lot of their children are being identified as neurodivergent, and it does make you realise that actually there's so many of us, and we have always existed. It's just now that there's better awareness around us and our needs. But what I wanted to say about the um, Family Justice Council guidelines in that respect is actually what they recommend is that the professional involved sort of has it in their mind that any client they meet could be neurodivergent, and it's sort of telling them what to look out for, um, so that that support can be provided, even if the person themselves doesn't identify as neurodivergent. So you might have somebody that, for cultural reasons or for just personal reasons, they wouldn't like a label or an acknowledgement that they have some neurodivergent traits, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't get that support. So essentially, what part of the guidance does is it says, these are some of the sort of areas, and these are some of the key areas of struggle. These are some of the questions that you might like to ask. But we're not asking you to diagnose anybody, because you don't really need a label other than if you want one for support or for sort of your sense of self. Um, what we should be looking at supporting are the behaviours, rather than only giving these adjustments to people who've got an ADHD diagnosis or have got a dyslexia diagnosis. It does sort of put it on the professionals' radars without having to actually say to the client even, oh, I think you might be autistic and therefore we need to do this. You can just say, well, look, I've noticed, for example, that you struggle with meetings if they're longer than 45 minutes. So let's just agree that we're just going to have 45-minute meetings, and then you're giving your best instructions, and I'm not sort of overwhelming you. You don't have to say, because I can see that you're itching to get up and move around. So it even goes so far as that, which I think is really helpful and perhaps reassuring as well to neurodivergent folks who find themselves going through that discovery process still, and they might not even know what adjustments they need.
Yeah, which just goes to show, doesn't it, that inclusion benefits everybody. Thank you, Hannah, so much. We could have spoken for
Oh
so much
yes.
longer, couldn't we, on this? But really appreciate you coming on and giving your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you. If any of the topics mentioned in today's episode are of special interest to you and you'd like to discuss this further, you can book a one-to-one session with a peer guide on our website at www.autismcentral.nhs.uk. Autism Central would encourage listeners to do their own research and make informed decisions about any strategies or equipment mentioned in this podcast. Any advice or suggestions given by a guest or peer educator do not replace or substitute advice received from direct consultation with a qualified professional. The Autism Central podcast is produced by Autism Central and is the copyright of NHS England.